according to the Taylor rule, Jerome Jerome Powell is the most dovish Fed chair in history. His refusal to cut rates implies some degree of politicization already. I mean, the guy had no problem cutting 100 basis points last fall. He had no problem being the most dovish Fed chair in history. This plot here shows the Fed funds rate minus the baseline Taylor rule estimate. So essentially, is the Fed tight or hawkish or restrictive or easy relative to the Taylor rule? This is the lowest value in the history of the time series. Was in 2022 when the Fed had the policy rate 1,042 basis points below what the Taylor rule suggested it should have been at the time. That's worse than Arthur Burns. I mean, Arthur Burns was like in the 700 basis point range, 700, 800 basis point range. So Jay Powell has no problem being the most dovish Fed chair in history until who's back in the Oval Office. So I think you can make a case that there's some degree of politicization going on already. I'm not saying there is. I'm saying that if you're in the administration, you could easily say, hey, you had no problem being dovish for Biden, so why can't you be dovish for us? So again, I'm not saying the Fed is politicized. I'm saying it's easy to make the case that the Fed is politicized, which, in my opinion, reduces their ability to fight back from this sort of politicized attack, and so ultimately has market risk associated with that dynamic. And this is the market risk. An already politicized Fed that is losing credibility is not a Fed that can reliably defend itself against politicized attacks. I mean, if you didn't do this and create a 40-year high in inflation, Jerome, then maybe you wouldn't be getting taxed so much. You know what I mean? Like the assumption, like if his track record was stellar, like excellent in terms of just keeping a lid on everything and just running the economy well, then I don't know that the markets would be so annoyed by President Trump's sort of political interference on the institution that I think they would shut him up pretty quickly, much like they forced him to pivot from paradigm B to paradigm C on April 9th. I think this track record that I'm pointing to right now on the page is gives the President Trump a lot more scope to attack him, because it's not a good track record. If you're on a losing team and you lose, if you're the Cleveland, no offense to my friends in Chicago and Cleveland and Ohio, if you're a Browns fan, you're Cleveland Browns. I don't need anybody in the Cleveland Browns organization telling me a darn thing about football and how football is supposed to be operated and played and executed. The Cleveland Browns need to sit down. And so this is a Cleveland Brown type-esque, track record in running the Fed. So I don't know that they have a lot of credibility, in my opinion. It's going to be a game of he said, she said, and until President Trump tells his buddies in Congress to do something about it, which I still think is a very underappreciated market risk, that they changed the way the Federal Reserve operates, right? Congress gave the Fed their mandates. Congress can take away the Fed's mandates. Congress can make the Fed's mandates change to something else, i.e. supporting the fiscal dominance. These are all things that do happen in fourth turnings. We told you this 2 years ago. You guys should know. You guys already know this. You guys have been expecting this for 2 years. You turn on CNBC and Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal and Barron's, and they're like, "Oh my God, there's a politicized attacks on the Fed." Guys, this is normal. This stuff is normal in fourth turnings. I've been telling you for years that the distribution of probable economic and policy outcomes is as wide as anybody trading risk right now has ever experienced. Nobody was trading in the last fourth turning. This is normal stuff in fourth turnings. Don't expect, you got to expect a much wide, if this is what consensus thinks is happening. This is fourth turnings. Oh, sorry. This is what fourth turning is. Get these, start thinking that there's more tail risk, both to the upside and downside as a function of the fourth turning dynamics. And so if you start investing with that expectation, you're going to recognize that the markets are going to get dragged kicking and screaming into accepting paradigm C, and eventually they're going to get dragged kicking and screaming accepting paradigm E. Not the I think the kids, but frankly in the crypto market, I think they get it more than anybody. When you talk to institutional investors, they're going to get dragged kicking and screaming because they're not paying attention to these fourth turning type risks in our view. And that's great for us, because we are, and we're making tons of money on it. So keep it going. The U.S. dollar may be front running an eventual erosion of Fed independence, something we've been preparing Team 42 for years. Again, we've been saying this is, you've got to expect In a fourth turning, you get fiscal dominance, and the monetary policy response to fiscal dominance is always to support fiscal dominance. That's it. So just work backwards from there. Don't worry about the statutes and the Humphrey Hawkins and can he fire Powell? Can he not fire? Who cares? The outcome is going to be monetary support of fiscal dominance, period. That is it. That is where we're headed. It might not be there tomorrow. It may not even be there by this time next year, but that is where we're headed. That's the upside risk to stocks, gold, Bitcoin. But by the way, there's going to be periods of time that we got to risk manage as investors. In our view, those periods of time, the frequency of those the severity of those, the frequency of the periods of times that we need to manage risk as investors in a fourth turning increases, and the severity of corrections increases, the frequency of crashes increases, but ultimately the pace of appreciation is also increasing. So you just have more upside risk with more volatility along the way. So that's what happens in fourth turns. This is consistent. What we've experienced over the past decade in terms of having a absolute a 20% delta in the stock market, U.S. equity market every year since 2015, either to the upside or downside. That's normal. This is normal fourth turning stuff. Don't assume anything that you hear that sounds nuts is nuts. It's not nuts. It's fourth turning stuff. So let's get back into it.